Okay, and we are live. Well, what's going on, everybody? I hope you guys are having a good day. Happy here to be live with a good friend of mine. The actual first get live guest that I've had on the channel. So be on it.
Sweet.
This is my good friend Zach, the Anglican acolyte. Excuse me. How you doing, my brother?
Oh, I as I was saying a little earlier, I'm trying to battle this bug, whatever this is I have going on at the moment. But we're alive, we're well, and we're gonna make it through this live stream.
Yeah, man.
How about you?
Well, I'm doing all right, man. It's been an interesting week, rough, tough week at work. Not rough, but not tough, but a little busy, but man, pretty good. Happy to be here, man. Happy to have you on. Happy for us to collab on the channel like this.
It's been a long
Wanted
time
to
coming.
have, yeah, I know it's been a while, man. We've been talking about this for a few months, but it's nice to actually get it going. Um, But yeah, I just wanted to collab. We both are from two different traditions starting out. If you notice on the thumbnail, I was a oneness Pentecostal deacon, and my friend Zach here, he was a Church of Christ pastor,
Yep.
and we both have found our way to Anglicanism. And wanted to come on and talk about some of the things that you know uh, pushed us in this direction, and where we think things could go from here. Different stuff, man. So if just introduce yourself, talk about your channel and everything.
Yeah. So my name is Zach. I run the YouTube channel, the Anglican Acolyte. Um, and I am also one of the leaders of the Anglican Renaissance Movement. As Jay said, I came from the Church of Christ. That's not the Mormons or the UCC. That is the Campbellites of the Restoration movement. I grew up there pretty much my entire life, from a baby to last year. Uh, I did not want to go into the ministry at all. I had lots of friends who went because their parents were part of the ministry or they had a calling. Me, I did not feel like I had any calling at all. I did not want that calling because I would read passages like James 3:1, where it'd say teachers and preachers would be judged more strictly, and I'm like, yeah, I if you were to look at the memes I was looking at the time, I'm like, yeah, I don't need that extra judgment or stricter judgment on me. Um, but it's the funny thing when we tell God no, suddenly God's like, oh, so you told me no, so we're gonna do that. And I happened to have all of the doors of the colleges I wanted to go to get shut on me. And funny enough, this room I'm sitting in, I live in the parsonage of the church I grew up in. Um, and in this very room, I was sitting next to a mentor of mine who is in the Church of Christ. He's a pastor. And he was talking about his Bible college and whatnot. He's like, oh, have you ever heard of it? And I was like, no, never heard of it. And he's like, well, you know, I know they do full ride scholarships. So why don't you apply in this room with me? And then we'll see what happens from there. And this is when I was in high school. And I applied thinking nothing was going to happen. And in the middle of, I think it was around lunch the next day at school, I got my acceptance letter, and I also got the full ride scholarship to go to the college. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I don't know what Bible college is all about, but I guess I'll give it a try. And originally went there for psychology. Well, it was kind of like youth ministry, but I didn't want to do youth ministry. So when I found that there was a non-ministry degree, and I also loved psychology at the time, I still do, but it was like, okay, I want that to be my degree because my reasoning, it's a very stupid reason, but I was like, I told myself in this degree, I'll at least get paid, not the bare minimum, because ministry people don't get paid anything.
Right.
Um, and then suddenly I happened to just be in a preaching class, and I started like seeing opportunities where, again, very bad reasoning, but I was like, oh, hey, I could make a quick buck preaching on a Sunday to be a call-in minister. I sure can do that. And so I started doing that for a while. I stopped, And then right about that time where I was starting to stop, I I started really feeling the call to ministry. And because I was still in rejection mode, I was like just trying to run from it. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And it got to the point where one day I was at somebody's house and I suddenly got very ill just out of nowhere. And I was like, hey, can I go like sit in your guest room? I just need to relax for a bit. Like, yeah, yeah, sure. So I go down to the guest room and I shut the door, and I remember because as soon as I heard the little click of the door shutting, all of the sickness that I felt in the moment was just gone. And I knew, and I opened my mouth. I'm like, oh, okay, God, you want to talk. And I know exactly what you want. I know you want me to go into ministry. I don't want to. I really don't want to. But if this is what you're going to do, fine. And stupid me decided to bargain. By the way, 100% of the time you bargain with God never works out. I said, all right, God, fine. I don't care. If you want me to be in the ministry so bad, send me to a church. I don't care how big or how small, send me.
No.
And so the next day, I go back to the college, and I happen to be walking down the hallway when the secretary of the president ran up to me, and she's like, hey, I know you haven't preached in a while. This is kind of last second, but next Sunday, somebody needs, like, this church needs a minister. You're the first person I see. I know it's been a while, but could you do it? And I'm like, okay, sure, I'll do it. And I go to this church that Sunday, and I get to the building thinking that there's going to be like some like regularly about like 5 to 10 that are there, mostly like on the like around 10. I get there, and I'm greeted by 3 old ladies, and that was the entire church that day.
Oh, Lord.
And so I preached probably the worst sermon of my life. Stuttered a lot, super rusty, was not a good sermon. And I'm like sitting there like trying to go to the door, kind of collect my paycheck and get out of there. And the lady, like one of the ladies, stops me and she goes, "Oh, that was really good." And in my head, I'm like, "No, it wasn't." But I'm like, "Yeah, like I tried my best." And the lady was like, "Hey, would you ever want to come back?" And I'm like, "Sure, yeah, I could probably come back if the college allows it." And the lady goes, "No, do you want to be our full-time minister?"
Oh my
Like
God.
it was kind of like semi part-time because they couldn't afford a
Yeah.
full-time minister, but like part-time, full-time minister. And I just kind of like looked up to the roof like this, and I was like, God, when I said I don't care how big or how small, I was kind of aiming for big. And here's what you give me here. Okay, sure, sure. I'll be your minister. And I preached there for I think about almost a year, and I got the church up to about 15 before I left to this other church that I was at for about 2 years. And when I was there, I was just like I always had this like desire to do apologetics.
Mhm.
And I kept running into the issue that I would see a lot in the evangelical world where it's like there would be good apologetics happening, but it's like it didn't really get like super into the history. And
Right.
it was kind of bothersome because it was like our best sometimes it felt like our best apologetics book was whatever the newest thing that was coming out, like hot off the presses. And I was thinking to myself one day, I'm like, surely there has to be, something in history that has answered this question before, which got me into looking into church history about the time I was still at the first church that I was at. And this led into the second church. And this led me down paths of looking into like Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy. Eastern Orthodoxy piqued my interest the most. Um, but I was met with a lot of negativity. Like at first it was like, okay, this is beauty, this is, ancient, this is mysterious, all that fun jazz. But then it's like the more I looked into it, it's like, yeah, no, if you're not like part of our church, you're outside the church. Uh,
Mhm.
I would see these like contradictions happening in history, and I was more or less kind of just told not to question it. Um, and probably the funniest, I mean, it's super sad, but one of the funniest interactions was I actually visited an Episcopal, or not Episcopal, I visited one of those too, but I visited an Orthodox church, and I get there, and it was kind of like the start of a joke because their secretary was a Roman Catholic. I was a like evangelical, and obviously the priest is Orthodox, and we all sat in a room, and I got like a tour around the church and everything like that. And at the very end of it, I like the priest walked up. He's like, "So, are you looking into becoming an Eastern Orthodox Christian?" And so place yourself in the shoes of the priest here for a second. You asked me that question, and my response is,
Hmm.
well, not right now, but I am looking to look deeper into your tradition and get
Right.
to know it more. So that's
Yeah.
my answer to you. What do you do?
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably, well, for me, because you said you're interested, I would say, well, let me explain to you. Let me talk to you about it a little bit. That's my answer, but I sometimes I know people when you hear not at this time, they just immediately brush you off.
Yeah. So as soon as I said, not at this time, I am interested though. Um, he looked at me dead in the eyes, and I kid you not, he goes, "Oh," and he turned around and walked away. Walked all the way up to his office and shut the door.
Nice.
And I'm like, so that's it.
That's it.
Like it's like I I mean, like I didn't try to look at it in like a gloating way, but it's like I'm the pastor of like almost 100 people.
Hmm.
I who you know like they love me to death, and I already did some changes in the church when I was there, just to kind of help them along the way. I'm like, potentially, it probably wouldn't have happened realistically, but it's like potentially I could be leading not only myself but like maybe 100 people to the Eastern Orthodox Church,
Right.
and all he had to do was listen. But yet, all he could, all he could, he could amount to is an O, and then just shutting a door in my face. And at this time, I was already kind of on the teetering edge, because at this point I've discovered Jay Dyer for the worst, and like
Yeah.
other just very toxic, Eastern Orthodox members online, and now at that point offline. And it was troubling because I had a friend, and this guy, he's an angel. Like, this dude's an absolute, I love this man. Um, he's like, yeah, dude, you gotta stay away from internet personalities, and you gotta like actually like talk to like legitimate clergy. And so I actually
Hmm.
ran into a priest. I think he was like a archdeacon, I think, and that particular priest as well. And it was like the same interaction. It was like, we're all fine and dandy because you want to learn, you want to grow, but then it's like, as soon as like I mentioned like my Protestantism, it was just like I
Right.
mentioned like I had leprosy or something.
Well,
And
you think they would take that opportunity to kind of explain to you, like, here's where we disagree, maybe
Mhm.
find out exactly what is it that has you hesitant, like what is it about Protestantism that has you hesitant, maybe give you some apologetic answers.
Yeah. And like one of them did for a little bit. Like, he was nice at first, but then I was sitting in on a with this book club thing that he was doing. I got invited to, and
Hmm.
it was like we got onto like some rant about Billy Graham, and
Oh, fun.
the dude just took like 20-25 minutes and just went on and on, just ripping into Billy Graham, ripping into Protestantism, and it was like he knew I was in the room, and I was sitting there, I'm like,
Right.
hello, like
Yeah.
what are we like what are we doing here? Um
Well,
and
that's
yeah,
kind of something strange that I find with some of the Orthodox brothers, some of the Orthodox guys is, like you said, the online kind of characters. You expect them to kind of do this kind of stuff, but even with some of the clergy. Now, I will say the one priest that my wife and I talked to there's an Orthodox church. I think it's Greek Orthodox. It's about 25 minutes from our house, and he was very kind, very gracious to us. The people there were very kind to us, but I've just noticed that there are some that take every opportunity to just rag on Protestantism. And it's like, well,
yeah,
if you're trying to convince me not to be Protestant, that's like saying, well, you that's like going to Roman Catholics and saying you Mary worshiping papists. I mean, that's not going to convince them if that's how you start the conversation.
yeah. And yeah, it was just belittling the entire time. Like I said, I was already seeing like these issues both historically and theologically, and I'm like, and it was sad because at one point it's like I really want to be Eastern Orthodox,
Hmm.
but like I just like anytime I try to have some reassurance on a lot of these like critical issues I was facing, it was either just getting ignored or it just turned into just Protestant bash hour. And I will admit, I did have a lot of resentment to the church. I've gotten over slowly. I mean, like there are still points where I do get kind of, you know, a little stern when I see this stuff happen online. But yeah, it was like I really felt church hurt in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's like I still had this yearning and this desire towards the like the ancient church. And at first I got into the Puritans just because I love their devotional material. And I was looking into Reformed theology as well. At this time I was already leaving the church, the second church now, because I was moving back up to Minnesota. And that, like, the funny thing about a lot of those situations with the Reformed churches is, those guys, they love their education and they have a very high minimal standard. Like,
Yeah.
I was needing, like, if not a doctorate, about darn near a doctorate and like 10 years of community service behind me to even like think about gracing the pulpit, or even at times like getting into the seminaries that they
Uh-huh.
wanted me to get into so I could get into the pulpit. And so it was just super unrealistic. And it was funny, I forget which denomination it was, but this dude was listing like this huge laundry list of qualifications. And at the end of it, he kind of chuckled to himself. He's like, yeah, it's kind of hard to find candidates these days for the ministry. And I was thinking in my head, I'm like, yeah, I wonder why,
Right.
yeah. And so at this point, I was getting weary. Um, but throughout like even into like the first church, I always had like a hint of Anglicanism around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at first, like I was like, no, I want to go even like I wanted to in my what I thought in my head. I'm like, I want to go more ancient than the Anglican Church. And then it turned into, well, no, I don't want anything to do with apostolic Christianity. I want that just good old Reformed theology, John Calvin, love
Mm-hmm.
him to death type of thing. But it was like I kept seeing flaws with that too, where it's like, I just felt like we were getting ourselves into logical conclusions that just they made sense, but at the same time, biblically speaking and pastorally speaking, there was a lot of things like, man, I have to say some things I just don't know. Like I can say it while reading scripture, like a lot of like the
Right.
very hardcore stances on providence and whatnot. But
Right.
I still have like a very strong reformed flavor to me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I finally was like, all right, well, I finally had a book of common prayer, and I got that because I went to a gospel coalition meeting in Indianapolis in 2023, and that's where I actually met Sean Luke for the first time, and him and I got to talking, and I found his YouTube channel prior to that, and I was like, dude, hey, I'm a big fan, da 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 da, and I very boldly was like, hey, can I get like a cup of coffee with you?
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, sure, sure. He's super friendly. And we got to talking, and eventually I was like, yeah, I want to get into like deeper theology. I want to get a master's and all that jazz. It's like, well, have you looked into Anglicanism? And I'm like, well, I mean, I tried. I would like to get a prayer book, but I just don't know where to find one. And he you can see like in cartoons and whatnot,
Uh-huh.
like a thing lights up, like his light bulb
Uh-huh.
went off, and he marches me all the way over to the InterVarsity press table, and there they had wrapped like 1662s, and he grabs one and he puts it in my hand. He says, "Here, buy this." And I still have it upstairs. I wish I would have grabbed it. It's very well worn at this point, and so I get it. I bought it that day, and I bought like a whole bunch of other books. And I was like, okay, I want to crack into the 1662. And the entire day, all the way like into the night, I would say about like 2 in the morning, I read the entire thing, and I remember putting it down, and I'm like, this book is brilliant. Like, it's. I didn't understand a lot of the lingo at first, so when I saw like in the morning prayers, like in Christ Jesu our Lord, I'm like, they have a spelling error. That's so silly, not knowing that's just like what the old text was like. But it was like this book is like this feels like a worship book,
Mm-hmm.
and like the language was beautiful, like the tone was just rich with theology, and I'm like, I've been missing something my entire life. And so taking that prayer book and jumping into the past couple years after, like after all that, um, I started looking into the Anglican Church, and at first I wanted to go to the ACNA because that's just the one like I
Yeah.
knew about. And it was kind of a similar situation with like the Reformed churches. It's like, well, in order for you to, become an Anglican and get into the orders and whatnot, you have to go to like our nearest church, um, be there for a couple years, and then, you know, then we could probably consider getting you to ordination. And the only Anglican church around me was up in the cities, and that's like an almost 2 hour drive one way. And I'm like, I gotta be Anglican at this point.
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine and I were just looking around, messaging every single denomination we could think of the Anglican world. And eventually we stumbled on the UECNA, and we started reading their bylaws and like what they stood
Mhm.
for and everything. I'm like, I think this is something, and this is even before I even had a conversation with any of them. But it's like these guys just seem, obviously, we have, there's some subjectivity here, but it's like these guys just seem very grounded in this Anglican
Right.
tradition I'm trying to seek. I saw Archbishop Robinson's email there, and so I sent a message thinking this guy's never going to message me back. It's whatever. Next day, he messages me and says, "Hey, let's set up a phone call." And I start the call with him, and I just pour out my entire life to this dude, like I'm doing now, thinking because there's not a UECNA church anywhere nearby, and uh, one of the questions he asked me, he's like, "Are there any like Anglican or Episcopal churches near you?" And I said, "Well, yes, Your Grace, but it's one of those Episcopal churches." And he goes, "Oh,
Mhm.
I get you. Yeah, don't go to those."
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, he and I got to talking, and then it turned to the point where I was waiting for him to be like, "Yeah, sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. Good luck in your endeavors," and hang up on me. But he instead was like, "Well, I can tell you have a heart for ministry. You're wanting to, you have this desire to become an Anglican, and there's something, I don't remember fully verbatim what he said, but it's pretty much just like you have the drive for ministry, you want to be an Anglican, and it would be a shame to pass you up." So he's like, "Yeah, I can work with you, and I want you to get in my theological seminary, Latimer, and I want you to stick by me, stick close,
Mhm.
and we'll see what we can do with you." And coincidentally enough, uh, around that same time, I was on X, and I happened to find Deacon Andrew, now Father Andrew, and Father Christian. I was like, "Hey, these are UECNA guys," and I messaged them. And they all knew each other, and I got I got hooked up into that inner circle, and they all were also really close with Peter as well. And yeah, I got into the Latimer Theological Seminary to do a certificate in Anglicanism, or Anglican studies technically, and I just wrapped that up not that long ago, and I kept expressing, I'm like, I like my calls to ministry.
Mhm.
And over over time, when I proved I wasn't some, well, not too much of a loon for Peter to handle, it was a little crazy there, but not enough to cause issues. Um, he talked about ordination. He's like, well, he's like, I want you on the ordination process, but we're gonna take it slow. We're gonna start you off with a deacon first, and that's what you're gonna work up to. And so it'll take about a year, but that's how we're gonna do it. And then in my head, I'm like, a year. I'm like, Your Grace, I was a pastor for like on and off for about like 5 years. You're gonna make me a deacon? Like, oh no, like,
Right.
but taking this year in studies, and really having a lot of time to reflect on myself, and then eventually joining the Order of St. Patrick last year and getting wrapped up in like monastic spirituality and everything like that. Now, about almost a month away, I see myself, you know, like about to be made a deacon. I'm like, yeah, I needed that year to just
Yeah.
really get all that grime, get all of that, just all the chaff off of the wheat, just so I could
Yeah.
be a man worthy of the diaconate. And it was reading uh, Pastoral Care by Saint Gregory the Great. It was
Mhm.
funny because I really couldn't put a word on it until I interviewed Father Brandon a couple days ago on the Arm channel, where he's like, I give this book out to everybody who wants to go into ordination. And I get one of two answers. They go, I'm not worthy, and they give me the book back and stop their discernment process there. Or they read the book and say, I'm not worthy, but I want to be worthy. And
Mhm.
I just read that book recently. and just reflecting on my walk towards the diaconate, I'm like, yeah, somebody probably the day I'm going to be made deacon is going to ask me if I'm ready. I'm going to be like, nope, but I want to be. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I just finished up that certificate, and yeah, this next month I'll be made a deacon, which is why I'm wearing my bishop calls the skunk tail right here, this black thing saying, hey,
Uh-huh.
he's a seminarian. But yeah, and then I became a novice for the Order of St. Patrick, and then through a wild series of strange events, which we could probably get into, I joined the Anglican Renaissance, and then a pathway cleared up like that, and I became one of the leaders for the Anglican Renaissance Movement. And yeah, that's my story. I was a little bit
Yeah.
more long-winded than I thought, but
That's all right. That's all right. Yeah, I want to get into it. Going to get into ARM too, because we talk about what ARM is about and what we're pushing for. I am also in the Anglican Renaissance. Um, kind of talk about the vision that we have, trying to bring about what we're trying to help bring about in Anglicanism. Just so as far as you becoming Anglican and coming from Church of Christ, were there any doctrines from or any beliefs that you had when you were Church of Christ that were easy to transfer over, and what was the hardest thing for you when you became uh, Anglican? Or what were some of the harder things that to let go?
yeah, probably the easiest thing for me was giving up memorialism, and that was even before I became an
Hmm.
Anglican. And that is because that's right, I just got rid of that book. I actually gave it to somebody else, but I'll grab another book in its place.
Hmm.
Um, it's because I read, this is not the exact volume it's in, but Thomas Watson,
Hmm.
his treatise on the Lord's Supper, and he did an absolute fantastic job really explaining how the presence of Christ is in the Lord's Supper, and how there
Hmm.
is a real presence there and everything. Over time, I developed the Anglican view of how the Lord's how the presence of the Lord is in the Lord's Supper. But for me, it was like, I don't know. I always felt weird about it, where it's like, yeah, I do think this, like this bread and juice, we do this in remembrance for Christ. But it just, I don't know. It just seems like we kind of just would move along really quickly to it. Like, we'd focus a
Hmm.
lot on the music, focus on the minister. We get all the people lined up. They'd come over. Some guy would say some sort of like meditation that oftentimes had something to do with more of like what was going on in the modern world. They would throw in, almost the same passage of, when Jesus broke the Lord, broke the bread and held the cup and says, "My body, this is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me." We pass out the trays, eat the stale bread and drink the lukewarm juice, and put it all back, get back in the and just immediately jump in and getting back to music.
Hmm.
And for me, it's like, I don't know. It just seemed it was normal because I did it for like 20 years, but it just seemed not fully what I thought it should be. And after reading that book and then looking deeper into Eucharistic theology, it's like, oh, this is like super important, and we kind of just are like whatever about it. And you kind of almost, when you take the more modern memorialist positions, 'cause I know like the earlier ones were a little bit more spiritual, but it's like when you
Right.
take these like memorialist positions that this is just a bread and juice and we're just remembering Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection, it's like it kind of almost does get played down quite a bit, because at the end of the day, hey, we're just remembering what Jesus did, you know,
Right.
through this little like bread and juice. But when you get into Anglicanism and you see like the passages where Paul, for instance, in First Corinthians, is talking about like, hey, doing this unworthily or doing this incorrectly is like actively eating curses upon you.
Right.
And I got to like reading those passages, and I read it a million times, but then like really slowing down and stopping and reading that, it's like, you know, I have some personally traumatic memories myself that haunt me to this day, but I don't think a single one of these ever like was a curse. And so Paul is talking about something here that's really important, and I just don't feel like we're doing that. And so I took a spiritual presence pretty early.
Hmm.
like I said, it developed more into a more polished Anglican view. Probably the hardest view, I would say infant baptism early on, just because I was so hardcore Credo Baptist. I'm like, no,
Right.
no, like the baby didn't make a choice. The baby didn't make a choice. Um, and now, I mean, now that I've seen a lot of the arguments, I'm like, well, it's actually pretty easy to jump over. But then, yeah, I would say that one probably the most, just because in that current time, just because um, I would really push the idea that like it's just not seen in Scripture. You know, it's just like every example, there's somebody making a choice, and when
Right.
people would do like but like what about like the family in Acts? Like the whole household got baptized. I'm like, yeah, but if I was to tell you that like me and my entire household got baptized tonight, would that include my children? And you know, just off that information alone, would you think that was my children? And somebody was like, well, absolutely that would. And I'm like, no, it doesn't, because I don't have any kids. But you didn't know that info because that's all I gave you, and that's what Scripture's doing. And there was like a lot of arguments I'd push there, but I had a lot of wrestling back and forth. I was like, okay, maybe it's illicit but not invalid. But if it's illicit, why don't we just do it anyway? So we probably shouldn't do it. And there's just a whole lot of back and forth. But it came down to Paul's uh, passage where he would talk about it being baptism being the new circumcision. And the
Mhm.
thing that really won me over, and it got stronger over time, it's like, looking at it from like a modern perspective, it's like, okay, you're just being entered into the covenant, cool. But then, you start looking at it in the realm of like a first century Jew. And it's like, I was a first century Jew, and Paul writes me a letter and says baptism is the new circumcision. Well, what does that mean to a first century Jew? And then
Mhm.
you start looking into like, I don't think it even has a title, but like I guess like circumcising theology, circumcision theology. And it's like, oh no, yeah, this meant like you're being entered into the covenant, but it's like, when did this start though?
Right.
Right when a little while after you pop out of your mom's womb, you're getting circumcised,
Right.
and you're being entered into the kingdom of Israel at that point. And so it's like, well, the Abrahamic covenant, obviously, but then it's like you're like a member of Israel because of that. Like that was the sign. And it's like, to a first century Jew, if I'm reading this thing, it's like, well, who are we giving this first to? It's like, oh, the babies, because that's just what we do. And going back to like it's not explicitly mentioned in Scripture part. It's like, yeah, infant baptism isn't explicitly mentioned, but what also isn't explicitly mentioned in Scripture is now, for some reason, God, without mentioning it once, revoking the desire for membership for the child into his covenant.
Mhm.
He never makes a peep about that, never mentions.
Right.
And so it's like, unless God quietly informed everybody without having the idea of like having someone write it down, be like, okay, now this is only for those who believe. Um, there is no revoking of allowing a child to enter into the covenant. And the stuff I would see is like, Jesus would say, don't hinder the children from coming to me. And also at the same time, again, if something has been done continually since the beginning and there isn't a change there, there must be some sort of like connection that is supposed to be unbroken there. And so, and that is what I later developed in my ideas of what I call the golden chains. And so it's like, if an infant is never openly excluded in Scripture from entering the covenant, then it's probably logically reasonable to say that they're supposed to be in the covenant. And
Right.
the idea of like, well, they didn't have, like, they didn't make that choice. When I started looking deeper into like where that talking point came from the Anabaptists. And
Mhm.
you know, some people have like a very like weird thing where it's like they're like nice to the Anabaptists, but also because they're like crazy. We don't agree with everything they do. So it was pretty much like, hey, we'll agree with the part about them not baptizing infants, but like the whole being like domestic terrorists and like taking over cities and rebaptizing people, we're just not going to copy that.
Right.
Or any of the other stuff that developed into like Amish or Mennonite theology. But hey, no infant baptism though. And it's like, even Zwingli didn't really have like a non-infant baptizing stance, and like that's the guy everybody championed on the Credo Baptist side. And so it's like when your own champion's baptizing babies, it's like again the only examples I'm seeing of people actively not doing
Yeah.
that were Anabaptists, and you know, reading into their theologies, like there was like list of confessions, and a lot of them would say, you know, like we don't even believe Jesus is God, Mary's not the mother of God. You know, like the Muslims taking over, like the Eastern Europe is like an active like sign of like God's wrath upon like the Christians.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of crazy stuff, and it's like, yeah, I don't know if I can align with these people on literally almost anything because like they just hold
Yeah.
radical views of all things, you know,
Right.
radical reformers. Yeah, and so eventually it was just like the more I looked into it, I'm just like, yeah, I I can't I can't be someone who withholds the baby from God's blessings there.
Right.
And yeah, like I said, once I jumped over that fence and I re-examined a lot of the takes of both the credo and the infant baptizing side, it's like, yeah, yeah, like I can't argue in saying that a child shouldn't be part of the covenant. It's just
Right.
ridiculous at that point. That in the early church, just people were doing this so early on, and some people argue for different reasons of like, well, you know, the child might die and whatnot. But it's like regardless, we have evidence pretty much from the early church to the modern day of infants being baptized, and the only time we divert from these are from again radical reformers who everybody rejects anyway, or literal cults. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Finding out that the like for me, you know, I mentioned in my testimony video, for me, and the occurrence that I had when I was in the Church of God with the associate pastor is really kind of what started me on that particular journey of studying the communion, because what he said to me, because we treated it very, when I was growing up, we would, there's all this kinds of repentance. It's very serious. It's very scary. This juice and this bread could kill you in some way, if you're sinful. So so we would do all kinds of repenting. We would repent before we did read 1 Corinthians 11. We would repent, after we repent before we take the bread. We were repenting and before we take the juice. We're praying afterwards. So we had all this serious repentance. But
Mhm.
then when I got into the Church of God and I had that falling out with the pastor, and the pastor said to me, it's an important commandment, but not an important tradition. That to me, it was like an immediate switch went off in my head, and like, there's something wrong with how we view this. There's something, the way we see this is incorrect, because that's the only way that you could say a statement like that and think that it's a good statement. So that's what kind of got me studying. For me, as far as infant baptism, understanding, it's funny. I grew up sometimes going to synagogues, because my dad grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, and I kind of grew up a Jewish adjacent. So we would go to synagogue, and we would, my dad loved the Jewish people and everything, but somehow the whole covenant thing, and it was funny is somehow growing up going to synagogue, sometimes, and also my dad coming out of Presbyterianism, somehow the whole covenant thing just didn't, just kind of didn't carry over. Um, So kind of understanding, covenants, as well as, as if for Pentecostals, we would, our whole shtick is the book of Acts is our blueprint. Well, when you read Acts chapter 2, Peter quotes Joel chapter 2. Well, in Joel chapter 2, when you read, was it verse, I think it's, looking at it, well, it's talking about the repentance, and it says to bring the infants. Well, that I think Sean Luke mentioned that, and it was like, man, I'd never seen something like that before. And then also, I remember reading 1 Corinthians 7, verse 14, when it talks about the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the believing spouse, and the kids are sanctified by the believing parent. And it's like, well, how, from our point of view, how is that even possible? How can you sanctify someone if they haven't made a choice? It just kind of gave ear to the whole. I mean, the reason why is because this is a covenant thing. It's not. yes, the relationship with God is important, but this is about the covenant faith. This is about the you're being brought into the covenant. It's not necessarily about the individual choice. And once you start to understand that, because and I think Church of Christ, if I'm not mistaken, also has kind of a baptism of regeneration kind of
Yeah.
doctrine.
Yeah, they believe in baptism and regeneration.
Yeah, same thing with oneness, because oneness, it, it, they would say they don't, but it is kind of a baptism of regeneration. So baptism of regeneration for me was not hard. It was just my understanding of it changed. But coming to infant baptism was like, once you understand the whole covenant aspect, well, okay, it's not hard to understand that. It's not hard to understand infant baptism once you put, like you said, put two and two together with the Jews. Um, First century Jews, if there was a change in them instituting their kids into the covenant, that would be something that came up, but it never does, you know. Um, so
Yeah, and the idea about baptism and regeneration, I always found that funny because again, like we would say, we're Bible only people. Like they would use like resources to help learn, but we'd
mhm.
always go back to the Bible. And of all the historic things that were traditional, baptismal regeneration was one of the things, like one of the very few things we kept. And I always liked that we were Credo Baptist and baptismal regeneration because we were friends with everybody and we were like the mortal enemies of everybody. Like Baptists would look at Campbellites and write just tracts upon tracts about how we're a cult, and the reasoning was baptismal regeneration, which was really funny because literally everybody else but them pretty much had baptismal regeneration. So
Right.
you guys are a cult because you believe everybody else, like what everybody else believes. And like all the other apostolic traditions and post Reformation traditions would look at us being like, you guys are bad because you don't baptize babies, but you're good because you like baptismal regeneration. It's like, man,
Uh-huh.
it's like being loved and hated all at the same time. Like it's such a weird life to live.
Yeah. Um, so you are in the UECNA.
Yep.
I am in the ACNA. What are some of the differences between UECNA and ACNA? And um, well, yeah, that'll be the question. What are some of the differences that you see?
Um, I guess we're gonna start off with the battleground quickly, I suppose. But one of the glaring things that separate us is that we have no women's ordination at all.
Hmm.
Um, very like that was part of the reason back in the '70s, right before the Episcopal Church went off the rails. The continuing movement saw what was about to happen. They're just like, nope, we're not doing that. One of those things was women's ordination, so we don't have that at all. Um, at least in the UECNA, we believe that there should be subscription to the 39 articles, the ordinal, obviously the Book of Common Prayer. I originally thought it was the Book of Homilies as well. I've heard some difference of opinions there, but regardless, the Book of Homilies is like very desired to follow after.
Hmm.
Our tradition mostly ranges old high church, so you get a little bit of flavoring of more reformed sides from some dioceses. The diocese I'm technically a part of is ranging a little bit more on the higher end. Bishop Peter, he's kind of more towards the middle. So you have like the difference there, but it very much follows after like the Caroline Divine Old High Church type of way. Hey, there he is.
The man himself.
I know these guys. Yeah, I did that did his live stream with Josh and Jacob. That was a good live stream, by the way.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm gonna go back and watch it.
yeah, it was good. Yeah, so we lean more into the old high church, and we desire the classical traditional way of Anglicanism there. The Book of Common Prayers we use, our standard is the 1928, but Peter doesn't really care, or Bishop Peter, he doesn't really care if he uses 1662. I know the Canadians, they have like their 1962, 63,
Yeah, I
like
think it's the
whatever that was standard is.
62.
Yeah.
I think it's the
Uh,
1962.
Yeah, they use that one up there, but I know they also use the 1662 up there as well. So that's what we hold to those Book of Common Prayers. That'd be different from the ACNA there. I'm trying to think of other things that'd be different.
Is it a requirement to be reformed in
No,
UECNA?
no.
Okay.
It's just like, again, it has like some flavoring there, but uh, not really. I mean, some guys lean more towards like higher. I would say higher, more towards kind of Anglo-Catholic, but like not in the Anglo-Catholic you would think. Like the sensible
Hmm.
ones around the Oxford movement that didn't like totally go off the rails. Um,
Right.
yeah, it's like you get this whole wave of thought here. The best way I can put it, see if I can just drop in my. So, when I first met Father Patrick, who is the dean of the Order of St. Patrick, um, I was really bouncing back and forth because I'm like, I see the positives of the Tractarian movement. I see the evangelical movement and their ideas. I see the reform. What do we do? And so he gives me this book right here called Evangelical Theology, 1833 to
Hmm.
1856. And so it's talking about the Tractarian movement and the evangelical response to it. And he's like, I want you to read the whole thing here. And I bought the book, read the whole thing in probably a couple of days. And the conclusion I came to after reading this was like, well, I get what the Oxford movement was trying to do, but because of John Henry Newman and company, they just like lost their minds in trying to, you know, recorrect some of like the lost traditions that weren't carried over because of reform sides. And a lot of them just went far too, Rome crazy and either converted to Rome or just tried to make Anglicanism into Rome. The
Hmm.
evangelicals had the strength because they're trying to hold, what has always been Anglicanism and trying to counteract against the Tractarian movements. But in order to do that, they tried to be as anti Anglo Catholic as they could, which often led them into getting like really, really close with like Presbyterian groups, and they started ironically taking away their Anglicanism to look more reformed. And I read this, I'm like, everybody kind of just collectively lost their mind during the Oxford movement. And it's like, what if like these strengths of the Anglo Catholics and the evangelicals like came together and like made one group, and like
Hmm.
you kept the tradition, you kept like on this nice firm like via media, and you just you know ride the tide and not lose your mind over going too Presbyterian or to Rome, like too close to Rome. And Father Patrick goes, yeah, that's pretty much what we are. And so it's like, I
Nice.
don't know. I didn't know if the book was meant to do that. I think obviously he was trying to push more for like an evangelical, like positive movement. But yeah, like the author in the history of the whole thing really paved the way of like, yeah, both groups were kind of the problem. And that's what we kind of are led to today.
Yeah.
And yeah, seeing that afterwards and like now knowing at least where I stand now, it's like, yeah, that's kind of like where the UECNA is. It's like it keeps that being media. Like I said, you might get some reform flavors, you might get some more Anglo Catholic flavors, but not it
Yeah.
rides this fine, nice balance in the middle that like I said, the best way I can describe is old high church.
Yeah. That reminds me of something Father Paul said, which speaking of, he left a nice.
There he is. Get a haircut. Yeah, Jay.
Yeah, I need a haircut.
Hey, talk about me.
But it just reminded me. Father Paul has kind of graciously been mentoring my wife and I, and he has mentioned about how you got some of the continuing churches, and you got the different issues and some of the branches of Anglicanism, and I share with him, and it's something similar that I shared with you, is like coming out of Pentecostalism where there's um more division than it seems. I mean, you think there's like 200 of the large and small denominations and churches. Just this. I mean, just so many of them. and the disagreements are ever so small, but
Hmm.
because of when it happened and all these different things, it's very divided. So when I so when I came to Anglicanism, it kind of broke my heart to come in, and another mentor of mine, Father Scott, he was priest with the Anglican Union. He had me read this book when I first came in because I was kind of coming in with rosy colored glasses, coming from Pentecostalism, and I've introduced to the BCP. I'm in love with it, with the tradition, and he had me read the book. Is I guess it's called Orthodox Anglican Identity, and after reading it, I was like thoroughly depressed because it was talking about all the divisions and trying to bring it together and the issues with bringing it together. And it's and I told my wife, I'm like, why would Father Scott have me read this? I mean, I'm depressed now, but it was good because it kind of tapered my expectation and understanding. Okay, let's don't hyper judge where you're coming from, and don't take a, like I said, a rosy colored view of where you're going. But Father Paul was saying that you got a lot of these churches, and it's like people agree on 95% of stuff, and it's like, but you got these slight disagreements that make us all divide, and it's like it's heartbreaking to see that the slight things keep us divided.
Hmm.
Now I know when it comes to ACNA and UECNA, even though ACNA does lean more Protestant than in its in some of its standings, I know one of the big things that separates us is the fact that we have women's ordination, especially to the priesthood. But you know, especially with those who don't have it, those who may, who all kind of agree, or at least have a general stance, to see so much division,
Hmm.
and it just seems to be getting worse and worse. And it's crazy because we're the conservative guys. We hold to the Bible, we hold to the 39 articles, we hold to a lot of these, to what we say, the tradition, but it seems like we're the ones fracturing. So it that kind of leads me into that's kind of leading into where we're going with the Anglican Renaissance. Before that, though, I wanted to, considering that you and I are coming from two restorationist traditions, but also just two very different traditions. Did you and do you have very many interactions with Pentecostals, and what let's wade into the water. What has been some of your observations about the Pentecostal movement as a whole?
Um, I mean, I'm around them a lot now, just because that's just what my job is,
Right.
chaplain. But I would say before it was a lot of more kind of like the mega church kind of Pentecostal world. That's where I had like a lot of like IRL interactions with. But
Hmm.
um, because I'm weird and I like niche music, I got really into like black gospel music, and I still
My
am.
man.
I love it. Oh, I love that music.
My man.
Donnie McCauliffe, throw that stuff
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Yes.
Gotta love some Donnie, man.
Oh yeah. And so it's like I would see a lot of these like those type of Pentecostal churches where they would, like, in my head at the moment, I'm like, they dress like Roman Catholics. They're also sprinting around the room. What the heck is this? Like, and so I would get, I think I ran into like a lot of Kojic, but I didn't know what Kojic was. I just was like,
Hmm.
okay, this is just what this type of Presbyterianism is. And then obviously, you get like the more like Baptist Pentecostal, where I'm like, okay, these are like a bunch of like old white Democratic farmers, and they're also running around the room for some reason,
Right.
waving flags and blowing the shofar horn and stuff. I'm like, what is this? And so I again, I didn't really see that IR. Like the closest thing I saw was I was in this church in LA. It was like kind of near like a homeless area, and that's like when I heard like real like black gospel music, like IRL. I'm like, man, dude, that stuff hit the soul. Like the
Oh
deal.
yeah.
And then obviously you got the pastor, and hope you don't have your morning scheduled out for anything other than church.
No.
My man's preaching forever,
Oh yeah.
but he keeps it lively. So like that was kind of my experience going in. Um, there was a lot of good in it just because these people were really like fired up for Jesus. I mean, I've been to IHOP in Kansas City.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that was cool. It was a very unique experience, but I've been in there a couple times. Um, there were at times where I would unfortunately see a lot of like anti-intellectualism because it was like I don't need none of that darn religion stuff. I just need me and my Bible and the Holy Spirit, alhamdulillah. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that would be kind of discouraging. But one thing I always tell people, because Pentecostals get picked on a lot, is you know say what you want about them, mock them all you will all the day long, but dude, are they just running circles around everybody else when it comes to evangelizing? They know how to get into the practical. They know how to get on like a level of, you know, understanding somebody, and they know how to be there for people. And that's why their churches are just killing everybody else right now. They're exploding in popularity. So that's the one thing I do really value about the Pentecostals is that they want to spread the word of God to just anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And at times, while it is unfortunate where it does require some sort of sacrifice to, be a little bit more, dismissive towards, you know, intellectualism, it like they just, they just bring the word of God to people, and they're
Mm-hmm.
showing no signs of stopping. And so instead of mocking them, because they're like the silly Pentecostals. Like, to be honest, I think churches should be taking notes on what they're doing and, maybe learning a thing or two from our Pentecostal brethren.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'd say there.
Yeah. Well, and I know so, and of course, as I've said, I mean, I'm in the diocese everybody likes to pick on. I'm in the church for the sake of others, and with good reason. There are some reasons to kind of pick on them a little bit. I love my parish. I love my priest. Um, but the bishop who founded C4, so coming out of Vineyard and uh, kind of having um, a lot of interactions with Episcopalians, and then bring them, ACNA bringing him in to kind of help consult and help them with evangelism, and then he just fell in love with it. I kind of feel some of the same thing is one of the things I think that and I notice even in ARM, one of the things I keep noticing is there are a lot of Pentecostals who are finding Anglicanism and are being drawn to it. And when you look at the history and you understand the Anglican tradition is our grandmother, and how we came out of Methodism came out of Anglicanism. It's that spirituality that it comes from somewhere. It wasn't born in a vacuum, and it comes out of the Anglican tradition. And understanding that is it's no small wonder why so many of us find a home in Anglicanism, while like, for instance, when my wife and I were looking and looking, and I had already decided when we left the Church of God, I didn't want to go to another Pentecostal church. I wanted to go more historic. And um looking at different Methodist churches and different, and Lutheran church near us, it just didn't. Though I have my family is all my mother's family is all Lutheran and Methodist. It just didn't grab me. It didn't pull me. But Anglicanism did. And one of the things that has been so heartwarming for me, you have your cessationists and your leaky cessationists. So you have all kinds of people, and all are welcome. But I am not unwelcome as a charismatic. As bad if I'm welcomed. It's just like, for instance, when we were about to join, we were going to initially join the Anglican Union, and one of the priests at the main church came out of the Assemblies of God, and he was saying his whole thing was, listen, I still speak in tongues in my private life. I still believe in the move of the Holy Spirit. but we have to put the fire in the fireplace. There's you can't let it burn the house down. And that it was like I never heard that before, but as soon as I heard it, like that's it. That's how I feel. And that's one thing I love about Anglicanism is it welcomed me as a kind of a lost Pentecostal charismatic. He welcomed me and are welcoming many like me. And that's one thing that I've really appreciated.
Yeah. And that's what was really beautiful when I was discouraged and I was still trying to find this historic Christianity, was when I did run into Anglicans. It was like, obviously you're going to have bad apples of all kinds, but the fact I was just interested in the movement and I had a desire to learn. It was like anybody, I had some, like I said, some guys who I was very disagreeable with at first, but now these guys are very good friends of mine, and they also threw conversations with me. Like, it was funny because it was like these guys were more high church Anglo Catholics, almost borderline Anglo Papists. I was more reformed, trying to become an Anglican, and it was like over time we kind of just balanced right towards that middle, and we came together later. Be like, hi, I was being stupid. And they're like, yeah, so were we. And it's like, can we be friends? They're like, yeah, we can do that. But it was like because of those guys and other Anglicans as well, like it wasn't, oh, you're this like leopard Church of Christ, evangelical. It's, oh, you're a Christian who wants to become an Anglican. Welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Sean, when I expressed interest in Anglicanism, his first thing was like, well, let's get you a prayer book and get you going. These
Mm-hmm.
guys, like, let's get you pointed towards the Anglican divines that you need to read. And so it was always this like welcoming presence there. And again, was there some pushback at times? Yeah, I think that was needed. But overall, it's, hey, this is what you want. Let's do it. Let's start today. And even now, I try to take up that thing when anyone's like, hey, I'm looking into Anglicanism. It's like, perfect. You found the right and wrong dude, because now you're going to get like a lecture all the time. But welcome.
Oh yeah, when I like just kind of a story so Zach and I met through the Anglican Renaissance Movement. And I think when did we really was it after you took over we started really
Yeah.
talking? Or and I think I messaged and I know when my wife and I and several there's other Pentecostals and charismatics, when we come in, a lot of people think that we want to get our tambourines and our flags and burn the I mean, just spread the fire. I mean, but Zach and I talked, and I was like, I was just like, listen, man, I want to learn. There's a reason why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, I hit Zach up, and I'll just there's times we talk about different things. He'll send me he and Father Paul and Eddie, who was in the chat, and different people will again, that's the thing I love is if you have a question. Now there's a downside to this, but if you have a question, there is a plethora of people who are ready, willing, and able to give you if it's not the scripture you need, the book you need, the Anglican divine you need, the church father. Now, of course, the downside is, as the old joke about Anglicanism is, you ask 5 Anglicans, you get 6 answers, So there's a little bit of the downside, but that's one thing that I love, that again, and I know, like I said, I know when we first started talking, it was a lot of what are you about? But you and others have just been so willing to help those of us who are coming from these disparate traditions understand what we're coming into. And I try to do the same thing with people who are also who may ask me, hey, you're an Anglican, tell me about it. Like, well, like, hold on, I can
Mm-hmm.
point you in the direction of some good guys. I don't speak for the church. I'm not ordained. I don't speak for I don't speak for the ACNA. I'm not an ordained clergy in the ACNA, but I can point you to the books that help me. I can point you to some good resources. I can point you to Father Paul's channel. I can point you to the Acolyte. I can point you to Sean Luke. Let's get you some answers so that way you can understand what it is you're coming into. and you don't have and you don't have a false idea about it, you know. Um, so again, that kind of brings us into the Anglican Renaissance. So what is the Anglican Renaissance movement? What is it trying to do? Who started it? Kind of tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Anglican Renaissance was originally started by Joe from the Young Anglican YouTube channel. Um, the idea was to get guys familiar with just get them familiar with classical works of Anglicanism, and have this retrieval back to tradition, so that there is, a solid presence of what Anglicanism has always taught. Um, it was going fairly well. There was a lot of traction. He was building up, and he's an absolute phenomenal dude. So he was doing very well. But over time, he was um, wrestling with the idea of either staying ACNA or go Episcopal Church, which inevitably he went Episcopal. And
Hmm.
this is where I said it kind of turned into a series of weird events where it's like I was present, I was always on the channel doing something, but it's like I didn't want to like try to take over. And so I would always like try to kind of like mind my space. At this point, you had like guys like River Devereaux, who wasn't part of ARM, but like he was kind of crashing out. Um,
Yeah.
Paul, he was like the other Paul, he was doing his own thing. Sean was super busy, and like all these Anglican channels that were kind of like the top heavy hitters were kind of just dispersing into like either their own stuff or like crashing out. And then eventually Joe goes Episcopal, and him and I are close. And he calls me up and he goes, "Hey, this is what I'm going to do. And I have the Anglican Renaissance movement, but um, like I don't really want to do it anymore. Do you want to take it up?" And this was February of this year. And I just gotten confirmed, and I've been deep in my studies at this point. But it's like I don't think I'm qualified. But I was like, I'm gonna pray about it. So I prayed about it, and I came to him later. I'm like, all right, I'll take it over. And in my head, as soon as like I got the permission, everything got switched over and everything like that. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna try something. And so I made our first video on the YouTube channel called the State of the Church, not thinking it was gonna do anything. And for what it was worth for that channel, pretty much being doormat for why it blew up.
Hmm.
And like suddenly everybody was super interested in the Anglican Renaissance. And um like we have like people joining the Discord like crazy now. We have clergy getting involved. They're all wanting to do stuff, and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing. And to this day, most of the time, if you were to ask me, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But what I do know is like there's this desire for historic Anglicanism, and to help combat against that darn dirty question of what is an Anglican, because you don't hear this from like many other groups. If you ask like what a
Yeah.
Presbyterian is, they point to the Westminster. You ask
Right.
what a Methodist is, they point to John Wesley. Obviously, Rome points to the Pope. But it's like Anglicanism, it's kind of this like whatever I want it to be. I'm like, that's just not what
To
Anglicanism
be an
is.
Anglican is to live in ambiguity.
Yeah, as our favorite wannabe bishop says. And so this is where I start developing this idea of what I call like the golden chain, where I'm like, okay, you know, Thomas Cranmer didn't die because of ambiguity.
Hmm.
Richard Hooker didn't write this long, very detailed book on the laws of ecclesiastical polity just to shrug his shoulders and go, I don't know, figure it out on your own. And all these other like great theologians of the church. And so I started attaching like what I call like the golden chain together. I'm like, okay, first off, where does Anglicanism even start? Because you have the whole, oh, Henry VIII, he like because of his divorce, like that's how your church started. It's like, well, let's look into the history of it. It's like, well, looking into the history, there's kind of an English church before Henry and way after Henry,
Right.
even into like virtually the first century of of of
Right.
after Christ. And you see this beautiful, enriching Celtic and Gaelic tradition that has always been there. And when you actually see what happens when Rome like takes over like the British Isles, they effectively see, and obviously you can get all this information from Father Paul, because again, the dude's an absolute brainiac when it comes to this stuff.
Oh yeah.
Effectively, Rome just kind of like hovers over England of, you guys are backwater, so you're no use to us, but we're going to come over and like take your money every once in a while for the church and kind of let you do your own thing. And so you don't really see much Latinizing happening there. Like it happens over time, but it effectively stays relatively Celtic, even when Celtic spirituality and theology takes over, all of Ireland and England, and even into continental Europe before Rome puts a stop to it, because if Rome can't control it, then it's bad. And we need to get rid of it. And then Henry comes about, but first off, it was for an annulment, and even then, he doesn't really like change the church in such a way where it's like created by Henry. He makes his own like Henrian church that dies with him, but you still have Thomas Cranmer there, and it Protestantizes. Like I would say first with Edward, and it really finalizes after Elizabeth, because that's where we eventually get anathematized by Rome. And we see this English tradition being carried through that, and it stays strong even when the Puritan rise up happens that butchers the country, butchers the churches, and it includes the death of Archbishop William Laud. But it remains though, and this remnant comes back with William the Second, and or not William II, Charles the Second, my bad. And he like the theology grows and grows, and obviously you have like the issues with like the Methodists and other
Mm-hmm.
groups around there, and it carries into the 1800s, and that's where I would say probably like the biggest shakeup happens, because this is where kind of everybody does its own thing here, with you know like the Oxford movement, the evangelical movement. You start seeing the Latitudinarians really rising up. I mean, they were always kind of peeking around, but they really rise up the 1800s. But the one thing that stays consistent is the 39 Articles, the Book of Homilies, the Book of Common Prayer, and the Ordinal. And you see groups, holding to these things in a very like bold thing. Like the Articles, today, unfortunately, people either try to say it's a historical document. They'll say, like we do hold to the 39 Articles, but right when you start like kind of pushing a little bit, there's a lot of like, well, we hold to it, but and it starts kind of getting watered down. Some people try to say it's only valid so much as it like it's valued through the Council of Trent, which is the most like audacious, ridiculous claim I've ever heard in my life. And you get people who just pretty much effectively say it's like of no value at all, and is barely even like touched. But what we actually see in the Anglican Church is not only are these articles so important that like you see in the 1604 canons, they're just held to be to subscription. You get guys, and I'm pulling up my logos here in a second so I can grab the guy,
Mm-hmm.
who would write just like tracts on how these were so important that like people would go to the fence of like, no, we should hold to these articles so that they are like so we know like what we stand for. And so seeing this stuff, it's like, well, it seems to be consistent throughout time, and the people who actively try to defy like what has been held forever often are the ones who are stripping off their Anglicanism to be something that we're not. And like for the Anglican Renaissance, then I I took a very hard stance of saying like, well, obviously we're going to have our different flavorings just because that's what happens. But the thing that people are desiring right now more than ever, and I think what you know the Anglican Renaissance can hold to, is this idea of, yes, we have differences, but we unite on what we are, like what makes an Anglican an Anglican. So that's the 39 Articles, it's the Book of Homilies, it's the Ordinal, it's the Book of Common Prayer. Not just any Book of Common Prayer, ones that hold to this like steadfastness. So the one like
Right.
I tried to find that everybody at least holds to in one way or another is the 1662. Now, granted, we've
Yeah.
added more prayer books eventually. The 28, the 60, the 1662. even the 2019 and others around that. The only one we don't hold is the 79 because that's just a whole other thing. But you know, when we have these like foundations of unity and tradition and history, this is where I would say ARM really kicked off, and you were there for those early years, even though it was like early months technically, since we're only like 7 months into when I took
I think
over.
it's been eight. I think it's been
Yeah,
8 months now, right?
7 or 8, yeah, because we started in
7, 8, something like
February.
that.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And so it's like 7 or 8 months into it, like that foundation has what made the movement. And so yeah, what we do now is we're pushing for education. We're trying to get people educated on the history of Anglicanism and theology. But most importantly, we are a foundation that is taking a stand against what has ravaged our churches and pushing back in a professional and proper way of not trying to like go like reconquista mode of like jumping into like your nearest like heretical like den of pagans and trying to like unpaganize them on your
Right.
own, as an uneducated young person. But it's like, no, we need people in seminary. We need people to be educated. You know, I think the ACNA is a fine group of people, even when I'm a UCNA. So it's like, you don't have to leave your denomination and join some other group. Just remain where you are, build yourself up, build up those around you. And if you are in situations where you have to fight and push back, you know, you can have allies from across these different denominations or like these different
Hmm.
sects and stand together in pushing back against liberalism and pushing back against the Romanizing or the Presbyterianizing of our
Right.
tradition. And you know in a matter of 7 months we have thousands of people on our YouTube channel. We have clergy, we have laity, we have theologians, we have musicians and poets, we
Yeah.
have people in Asia and America and Europe, France and England, Singapore, Turkey, like United States, Canada. We have people all over France. I think I mentioned them, maybe I didn't. We have people all over the world who are saying, "This is something I signed up for. This is what I want in my church." And you guys are doing it in ways where, as we were talking about earlier, with like how we were treated becoming Anglicans. We're not pushing people away, because they don't fit our very niche criteria. It's like, no, the only time we push away is when people are Romanizing or Presbyterianizing or liberal and saying, sorry, this
Hmm.
is not what we hold to. But if you are somebody who's a God-fearing Anglican who desires, well, I don't care if you're Anglican, ACNA or UECNA. And because of this, we've been able to get a lot of success in ways of, groups like the North American Anglican blog. They are working with us. Um, Surprisingly, the coolest thing, thanks to one of our guys, Jaden, who is in our Discord, he was able to set up a time for me to get in contact with the Anglicans for Life. Because one of the things I push for is being pro-life. I think that is something that we need to stand for as Anglicans, and so I made that a part of the Anglican Renaissance. So working with the Anglicans for Life, we have guys, like I said, all across the board in various Anglican groups. We have a map that shows, who represents the Anglican Renaissance movement in those churches. Um, we have guys like Father Brandon, obviously Father Paul Castellano, you, me, the Northern Anglican, Sean, both Reformed Catholics, uh, barely Protestant. Father James, he's with us. Um, the whole laundry list of people you can check out on our YouTube channel. Father Jeremiah, he is one of our best guys.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
Father Daniel Hickson, he joined us. So if you want a little bit of a Wesleyan flavor, we got him. We got
Man.
everybody on the Anglican
Yeah.
side. And
That was awesome when he joined because I mean, Father Hickson was influential on my wife because initially she wanted to become she came to wanting to be Anglican through John Wesley through studying Wesley, and she stumbled onto Father Hickson's channel, and that eventually led her to Anglicanism and studying Anglicanism. She didn't become Anglican for a long time, but those are the kinds of things that influenced us. So when you mentioned his name, I was like, oh man, this is awesome. To
yeah,
have him as well.
yeah, and we even got groups like the Episcopals for Renewal, which you think like, oh my goodness, like Zach, you're one
Uh-huh.
of the biggest ops for Redeemed Zoomer. It's like, well, you know. I don't I don't I want to do what's best for the Anglican Church, and for them I saw a group of, people of all ages who are trying their very who are trying their very best to, recover the Episcopal Church. And I thought to myself, and I think about this too anytime like ACNA has an issue going on, it's like I benefit nothing from watching a bunch of my fellow Anglicans who are God-fearing people suffer because they're not part of my team.
Right.
And, you know, I saw what they were doing, and Eddie, who, we saw in the chat earlier, who is just an absolute angel of a man, had connections with
Right.
them and was able to have us have a conversation. It was able for us to have a conversation with their leaders, and we sat down and talked with them. And, while they're not a part of ARM, they are very close allies, and I value what they're doing, and I want them to succeed there. So we have Episcopals for renewal as well. Because of them, we might be having a meeting soon with Davenant Press, which is super exciting. Let's see who else, like big names. Anglican Compass, we're trying to start something. There's one other thing I'm blank. I always look at the website, but yeah. So that is what we're doing as a movement. The North American Anglicans for Reform, obviously, them. We work with them as well. And one thing that what we push for as well is our monastic tradition within Anglicanism. So we have the Order of St. Patrick, the one I'm a part of. They joined us. We have groups like the Order of St. Augustine. They're not a part of us, but we work with them. And the Order of St. Dallin. We're also starting to get more of a fellowship there as well. And for the absolute like big polls that we have done for the Anglican Renaissance that I'm very proud of is, so one of the groups that we, or the persons that we polled was let's see. Or somebody sent me a message there. One of the best polls we had for the Anglican Renaissance was Father Paul Castellano.
Absolutely.
He was this walking mythical figure that like everybody admired and enjoyed. And Father Christian, who was a mentor of mine, his mentor was Father Paul. And I saw his interview with Javier Perdomo, and I'm like, I at least got to talk to this guy. And I was just amazed looking at his YouTube channel, and I saw it, and I was like watching his videos on church history and just listening to his sermons. I'm like, and that book right there, yeah.
My wife and I are currently going through this book together. I mean, it is an absolute. This is an absolute must read. As It Is in Heaven by Father Paul Castellano.
Oh yeah,
it is an absolute must read.
I cannot recommend that book enough. He told me when reading it, it was going to be challenging because people get frustrated reading the book. I'm like, oh, I don't know about that, and I read it. I'm like, yeah, I'm immensely frustrated, but I feel like I've been learning a lot.
Oh
and, yeah, I can't recommend that book enough. In fact, I actually just gave that to a Church of Christ friend of mine, and he messaged me, and he's like, "This book is frustrating." I'm like, "Yeah, it's
yeah,
it
is. It's so frustrating.
I know. But it's a very good book. And yeah, so I had a conversation with Father Paul, and I showed him the website of the Anglican Renaissance, and we had a conversation. He's like, "Well, I'll think about it." And I'm like, "All right." So he's going to tell me politely no to my face and never message him ever again. But then a little while later, he's like, "I see what you guys are doing. I value, just the work ethic we have going on and what we're doing." And he's like, "I want to be a part of this." And if you know anything about Father Paul, he's an all in or all out guy. And so when he said he was going to join, we couldn't have reached like bigger heights with our intellectual level for the Anglican Renaissance. And so he doesn't get enough credit. He's an absolute genius. Father Paul is, one of our lifelines to the Anglican Renaissance. And yes, if you haven't read his book, As It Is in Heaven, do yourself a favor and buy that book. It's a fantastic read. Again, frustrating, because like my old Church of Christ, like, inner soul of mine is like, screaming because I'm like, this isn't right. But it's like, well, I look at it from an Anglican lens. I'm like, it's uncomfortable, but this is Anglicanism, and
Yeah, and
it
it
goes right
pushes you.
afterwards.
It definitely pushes you to see things that you may not have seen before through Scripture.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, what I'm absolutely loving, and like I was saying earlier, um, unfortunately, I'm sure you might probably you'll agree with this coming from the traditions that we come from. I think we have a tendency to see the Old and New Testament as separate,
Hmm.
and he does an excellent job in showing how they're not, and
Yeah,
how
very
they really flow together. And once you see the connection between the two, and once you see how the Old Testament points forward to the New Testament and all of the I mean, just even things like the 12 elders and the 12 apostles and the rite of initiations of and the rites of continued fellowship and just all I mean, and how worship flows from heaven, not from the tabernacle, from heaven to and it flows here. It's once you see all of those things, you can't you can't unsee them and you can't go back to the way you used to think in a lot of ways. And as he even said, he'll even tell you, you don't have to agree with everything he says. Just be respectful when you do,
much.
when you do, when you disagree. And honestly, there's one or two things that I may like say, "Ah, I don't know, I have a hard time going as far as you go, but as far as the total message of what I haven't it's been difficult because like I said, my wife and I will read a chapter together every night. And it's tough to it'll be tough because my wife with her ADHD, sometimes she'll get, like, overloaded with information, but I wanna keep going, you
Hmm.
know? But it is an absolute must read. I keep recommending it to people, and I think more and more people should read it. But, yeah, no, he was an excellent and like I said, he took on mentoring my wife and I, didn't even know who we were, you know?
Yeah.
The fact that he was willing to do that and it's almost like every other Sunday we'll have a Facebook Messenger call and he'll walk us through questions and things. And mind you, he's a pastor of he runs a parish. I mean, he has a whole ministry that he's doing. But the fact that he was willing to take the time to mentor a knucklehead charismatic. I mean, I mean, I can't say enough positive things about Father Paul.
Yeah. Man, I really need to probably start video calling him more. I don't know. I always get intimidated because I'm just like, man, he's like that. I don't know, because I'm a nerd. I'm like, he's like that old wise Jedi where I'm like, I could learn so much about this guy, but I'm just intimidated because I'm like, I'm not worthy to be in your presence or to untie
Right.
your sandal.
We are not worthy.
Yeah, literally. Um, but yeah, he's also been just a huge mentor for me. And yeah, like I said, I look up to the guy because
Mhm.
like I say, he's brilliant. In my mind, he's a genius, and it's just like he's the thing about it though is he's very, and as you said, he's very pastoral, and he will take time to be like, hey, let's talk, and
Mhm.
he'll walk you through it, and he'll instruct you, not not berate you, and
Yeah.
that's the fantastic thing about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so another huge thing before before we're probably gonna move on, I need to mention these is I wanted our movement to have legitimacy, and one of those was having a bishop back the movement. And so one of the greatest polls that we now have, um, I brought the Anglican Renaissance Movement to the Archbishop Peter Robinson of the UECNA, who's
Mhm.
also really well loved on the internet. And I again, we had a phone call. I sat him down. I just spilled everything about the movement, and I didn't even get a really that far into like my plea about the Anglican Renaissance movement. I think I maybe had like a page worth of information. out of like the 7 pages of lore I was going to drop on him. Because I mean, hey, if
Uh-huh.
he's going to do that with me when it comes to like trains or niche things about England, I'm like, dog, you get to sit for my lecture. I'm the teacher now. And like I got like 1 page into it, and he goes, "Oh, this sounds good." I'm like, I have more to." He was like, "Oh, I could be like bishop oversight over it." And I'm like, "I didn't even tell you anything yet. Are you serious?" I'm like, what? And yeah, I sent him the website. I'm like, just tell me what you think. And he went over. He's like, "No, I'll give you bishop oversight. I support this movement." And yeah, so that really legitimized our like our not denomination. God forbid the Anglican Renaissance ever becomes a denomination.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, let's not do that. But like when he was gonna back the movement, and he said yes, and he gave us that oversight. Now, granted, he doesn't like pop in all the time because all respect to the bishop, but he's like a dinosaur when it comes to the
Yeah.
internet. So I highly doubt that he would ever create a Discord. But I show him like what we do. I show him like what we represent, what we hold, and he says we can use any of his resources that we want, but he's the one who signs off on the movement. On top of that, we also have Bishop Slish of the UECNA, who also said, "Hey, let me see if I can get involved in any other way." So now we have 2 bishops of the UECNA backing the movement. So we're not just like some ragtag, group of just rando Anglicans on the internet trying to fight a lost cause. It's like we have bishop support, we have
Hmm.
clergy, and like I said, we have theologians. We have lay people, but we also have writers and poets and artists and you know people going into the ordination process, people discerning the ordination process. We have people in lay organizations and lay orders. We have like the entirety of the Anglican Church in our movement, and they are all positive right now. And
Hmm.
obviously we're still, I'd say, quite small. We are the foundation, if I can speak so boldly, that Anglicanism needs right now. Because while you turn on the news and you see all the scary things happening and all the division, all the worry, and all the stuff that's going on, you know, that foundation Anglicanism needs is found in the Anglican Renaissance movement. You know, that tradition, that standing up against the heretics and the false teachers, that movement that says I want to educate everybody from the feral guy who like reads everything and wants to become a priest, all the way to the lovely grandmother who just barely reads her Bible. It's like, let's get these people educated on what they believe. Let's focus on getting catechism to be stronger. Let's focus on bringing back writers like Laud or Hooker or Jewel or you know, like Lancelot Andrews or Jeremy Taylor. Just pick your Anglican divine and get them to the lay people. That's what the Anglican Renaissance movement is. And again, you know, we're not even a year into it, but what I've seen so far, and the amount of support and love that the movement has, it's like we are going many great places, and I don't see us stopping at all for anything. And so that's I mean, I don't know if you want to have like your more perspective on what you see as the Anglican Renaissance, but that's that's what I see, and
So
I'm excited.
so when and I've told you this when everything went south with, and I just say south just because when Joe went back to the Episcopal Church, my wife and I joined the Anglican Renaissance because we were coming into Anglicanism and we were trying to learn more about it. We said, well, what better place than this group. We didn't think much of it. We were like, oh, it's just going to be a bunch of online people, but we can at least learn some things. Um, and when when you took over, we were, we because of how everything looked initially, we were like, I don't know where this is going to go. But then slowly but surely, clergy started joining. All the, I mean, like you mentioned, Father Andrew and Deacon Jeff are two people for me because they both also came out of Oneness Pentecostalism. I, connecting with them has been awesome. Um, but just slowly but surely, um, the there the leadership was orchestrated in a way that it wasn't like you said, just a ragtag bunch of young men online like so many other movements sometimes turn out to be. It's ordained clergy, it's theologians, it's people who've gone to seminary, people going to seminary, people who discerning, all the people that you listed off, bishops, dioceses. I mean, reaching, and at this point we have, like you said, we have connections in churches. It's spreading throughout the globe. What I see is a movement that is important for Anglicanism. What I would love, I love the fact that those of us in ACNA and UECNA and ACC in this movement, though we have our spirited debates, we all have our opinions, but at the end of the day, especially from the moderators and the leaders of ARM, kind of keeping a watchful eye over making sure that nobody has knockdown, drag out arguments to the point where it does start causing division. I will is ARM going to make Anglicanism unify in 5 years?
No.
I mean, if God could be so good. I mean, but um, but what it is a foundational movement that I think is the starting point of a recapturing of a spirituality and a tradition that needs to remember what it is
Mm-hmm.
and who they are. Not to be corny and quote Lion King, but we need to remember who we are. I know Miles from Canon and Creed. Oftentimes, that's how in his streams. For Protestants, you don't need to. You need to remember. You need to remember the excellent writers and the excellent arguments and the strong tradition that we have. And I see ARM as that. I see ARM as a reminder of what Anglicanism is and where it's coming from. And hopefully through doing this, starting from the grassroots, starting from a small group of people, we can encourage greater and greater unity. Will, like I said, will every denomination join one another and there be one province? Hopefully, eventually. But as of right now, if we could just get each other to work together, to just come together and be in communion with one another and not fight one another, and just to remember the foundation, that right there is will be that right there will be one of the biggest accomplishments. And I think we have the foundation of that and getting to that.
Yeah. Like when I started the movement, like Anglican Renaissance 2.0, I would like I know there's that ADHD riddled mindset of the internet of like, let's do this thing, let's complete it tomorrow and ride off into the sunset. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, hopefully this. I mean, I look at it as like a wheat and chaff situation here, but I view what we're doing decades. And so when I first picked up the movement, I said, this is a task I'm taking up that at minimum 20 years is going to go by.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to go slow, but I want it to go slow because typically, movements like this, when they kind of do that firecracker thing of cause a whole bunch of ruckus, immediately try to get as much stuff done as quickly as possible. Yeah, it catches a lot of attention. There's a lot of power behind it, but eventually, inevitably, it always burns away. We're seeing this with Eastern Orthodoxy right now on the internet. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of growth there, but enough cancerous people have latched themselves onto that thing where people are just getting burnt out from Eastern Orthodoxy because it's not the greener grass people think it is. Like, yeah, there's a lot of people converting to Rome, but at the same time, you look at the statistics, the growth isn't that big. And again, we're seeing a lot of this like brutish pride, making people not want to be part of that church. Um, you know, you see the Reconquista, you see like the efforts it's doing, but in its efforts, it keeps shooting like valuable needed allies in the foot to hold to this very niche way of, how it defines itself, and it doesn't care, and it causes more issues than it involves, than positivity. And so the Anglican Renaissance, it is grassroots, it is slower, but in that slow effectiveness that we have, you know, even though it has all happened very early on of like all these big goals we had, we're still moving, but in a way where we're treading the waters very carefully. We're
Hmm.
letting the other movements have their time in the sun, but we're not here to just fight. We're here to educate, and you're not going to educate somebody in a day, let alone a month.
Right.
It's going to take a while. We're here to raise up children. It takes, hopefully longer than a year to raise up a child. It should take their entire life. So it's like what we're doing is this slow, inevitable creeping into the future. And, I have plans for hopefully like starting a seminary for the Anglican Renaissance,
Right.
you know, just so we can have people educated like in such a way where they're even getting accredited information. You know, I want us to build up writers so that they can, just publish their articles and, publish books even and try to, like draw this deep richness. That takes time. And even, even building allies and, getting people and advertising, getting people interested in the Anglican Renaissance. You know, you could do that quickly, but you're really going to get the good ones that you want to keep around longer if you just take your time. And so that's what we're doing with the Anglican Renaissance in that way. So yeah, it's like, would it be amazing if I wake up tomorrow and I find out the Anglican Renaissance was such a huge success? All the Anglicans come back together and we can sing Kumbaya and become one, Anglican church again. Would absolutely, I would love it, and I could retire. I could retire a happy man. But reality is, if I want that, that's a whole lifetime.
Yeah.
And you know, can I dedicate myself to a lifetime or to 5 minutes in the flash pan and like leave my time with the spotlight? And it is that first answer of it has to take time because ultimately it's not about me. It's not about Sean. It's not about you. It's not about Paul or Eddie or any of the guys who make the movement. What the movement is, it's not about us. It's about God, and it's about you know having this love for a church that has brought us all together and has shown us the Christian message.
Hmm.
That's the point. And so, if it ever becomes a cult of personality, I'll burn the whole thing down and delete it all tomorrow. Like that's not what we represent. It's I am an Anglican. I will now live the rest of my life as an Anglican, and I will defend this church. But at the end of the day, I will pass down whatever I have to the next guy so he may do the same. If it can happen, if great things like that can happen in my lifetime, I'll take it. But I know that it is ultimately about God, not about me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. In October, my wife and I will be confirmed, and there's, we have plans moving forward. I've already talked to my priest about getting into becoming a lay catechist and things like that. There's still some there's still some my I definitely am considering um I'm definitely considering the diaconate. I am.
Do it.
I
Use my
I
hand,
definitely
I take it.
but most definitely to just kind of get in. I want to, because of where I come from, and because of I strongly believe one of the reasons why. Uh, hold on, this is
Christianity.
that's my sister. Who knows? Time will tell. Time will tell. But
We're saying if
um,
James 3:1 couldn't keep me away.
that is true. That's true. And listen, my dad my dad would be tickled pink the fact that I'm even considering the ministry, because I told my dad I didn't want nothing to do with it because my dad was a pastor and I saw what that did to him. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. I became a deacon because my dad asked me one day, you know, like they really want to be they wanted me to be a pastor. Um, my other sister, hold on, that's my other sister. My siblings jokingly call me Father Calvin. Calvin is my other middle name, but
that sounds like a good YouTube name to me. I'm just saying.
So I go in, I go in, huh?
I say you can get like some like just sweet like black gospel music on your YouTube channel.
Oh
Like,
man,
hello, my children. It's Father Calvin.
hello, my children. Let me talk to you. This is Father Calvin here.
I'm here to tell you about the mystery of the sacrament.
Let me tell you something now. I'm here to preach you the gospel.
I'm here to teach you the true word of God, my
oh
friend.
yeah. But so I walk into my dad's room one time, one day, and he's like, "Son, what do you see yourself doing?" Because he really wanted me to be a pastor, and I said, "Well, I'm already doing a lot of the things the deacons in the church do. I can see myself being a deacon." So then the next day we're at the church, we march into the bishop's office, and he says, "So I hear you want to be a deacon," and it's like. So my dad kind of strong armed me into becoming a deacon. So of course, we did a training classes and stuff, and I was ordained. I still have my deacon card upstairs. I keep it, and when I left the church, or when I was kicked out of the church, I always told myself I would never do. I don't want to go back into ministry. I don't want anything to do with it. But I won't lie to you. It's kind of like what you said. It just seems like it just seems like the ministries where I just keep coming back to it. I mean, I started the channel because I noticed that there was a lack of knowledge of Pentecostals, of history, and I wanted to do Pentecostal history videos, and now I'm an Anglican. So it just seems like the ministry is just where, I don't know. I feel because I did it for so long, being a PK and a deacon, I feel comfortable with it. I know, I'm no stranger to it. Um, I'm still discerning, but I really want, I really have a strong desire to make sure that people understand the doctrine, because there are some Pentecostals who do understand doctrine really well. Um, but I think one of the ways you get to oneness Pentecostalism is just you're very, very disconnected from church history and and knowledge of the doctrine. And I want to focus and help people understand, like, listen, this is the doctrine of the church. This is the doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ, and help people remain foundational on that. So I've already talked to my priest about that, and I have mentioned to him that I do want to consider the diaconate, but first things first, I have to get be confirmed. Hold on,
I'm in full agreement with your sisters here. Father Calvin. Yes, Father.
Yeah. Praise Jesus.
Praise Jesus. I'll even, if it ups the ante, if you do consider the diaconate, this is my vow to you, and I make vows very seriously. I will fly down and be there for it.
Oh, dude, that you have to, man. Like, you definitely would have to.
100%.
In the tuna mo to come back to the my sister. Listen, I have no bigger. The only person who champions me more than my siblings is my wife. They and I will say my sisters understand. Like, for me to say I want to go back, I would go back into ministry. That's a lot of growth, considering where we come from and all that we've been through. So they understand the gravity of me saying that. So but
I'll be the terrible worm tongue in your ear, being like, "Do it, Jay. Do it. I will do it. Do it. Do it."
Yeah, then you have Zach in the back. Everything has happened as I have foreseen.
Good, my friend.
Well, and it's so funny because like we were gonna, like I said, when one of my first couple of mentors, Father Scott and Father Lee, they really are really been blessings to me. But Father Scott, we connect with him, and one of the first things he says is, I think you'd make a good deacon, and I think you'd make a good chaplain.
I
So you just
mean,
have everybody's like, do it, come, my son.
that happened to me because like when I finally was like, all right, I'm going to go into ministry, and I started telling people, I was like, yeah, after a long discernment process, I think I'm going to go be a pastor, and someone's like, well, finally, and I was like, what do you mean finally? And they're like, oh, dude, you like we were all thinking you should have been a pastor by now, and I even my next door neighbor that I grew up with, she's like, yeah, I remember when you were like 2 years old, 3 years old, you'd come up to me and ask me if I knew Jesus and would talk to me about him. I'm like, I don't remember any of that. And like, yeah, you do it all the time, and I'm like,
Uh-huh.
apparently everybody has some foresight I don't. And I'm like, well, thanks for telling me. And they're like, oh, we have been. I'm like, shut up.
Yeah, that it would be just like me to wait till after my father's passed on, God rest his soul, to become a pastor. Because I told him I refuse. I'm like, no, I don't want anything to do with it.
He's like, well, 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 what do we
Uh,
have here?
what do we have here?
You thought you could forsake your destiny, baby. Not here, not no more.
He would, yeah, my sister's right. He would love it though. He would absolutely love it. He may not love where I would get into it, but he would definitely love that I did because he was definitely one of those people who believed his kids had a calling to the ministry and stuff like that. And speaking of which, because I would like to get you, because for a lot of Pentecostals, you mentioned the monastic life and the monastic order. Can you explain for people? Because for Pentecostals, when they think monastics, they think Roman Catholic, living
Mhm,
off in they think a lot of that kind of jazz, and it's kind of a turn off for a lot of people.
mhm.
Can you explain the monastic life and the
Yeah,
order of Saint Patrick and stuff to people in a way that makes sense?
yeah. So we're a little bit, for all my like bantering and fist waving about tradition, we're a little bit not as traditional as other monastic groups because traditionally you have, the idea of like you become a postulant, a novice to the order, eventually become a professed brother or sister. You stay in a monastery, you have your own cell, and you do morning and day, like midday and evening, excuse me, morning, midday, and evening prayers, and you're constantly filled with a life of prayer. Depending on which monastic order you are part of, some lean more into like academics, like Dominican and like Augustinian are like a little bit more on the. I mean, all of them have academics, but those are like the big powerhouse. If you're looking at Rome, for more spirituality, you might have like Carmelites or even like the Eastern monks of the Orthodox Church. But one that often gets overlooked a lot is the Celtic monks, and these were the guys who, while they still like had their monastery idea, their big thing was evangelism. Like these were the guys who were taking over Ireland with St. Patrick's Order, of how he did things, and then later on was like St. Aidan and others. Um, so where the Order of St. Patrick comes in is because we're not a cloistered order, which means like we don't like hang out in a monastery all day. Which is nothing wrong with that if that's what your calling is. Obviously, that's why we promote the Order of St. Augustine, and I think Dolan might be cloistered. I don't think they are, but I'll talk about it. But at least the Order of St. Augustine, they're a cloistered order. If that's what you want to do, by all means, that's where the Lord is leading you. But for us, what we do is we take the monastic tradition to the laity. And so your monastery, so to speak, is your home first and
Mhm.
foremost. For me, since I'm getting into the ordination process, it's the chapel that I run. So that would be the Celtic Cross Anglican Chapel here in Minnesota. And our big focus is the spirituality of the Celtic tradition. So, like seeing God through nature, seeing how uh, through family and friendship, because that was a big thing in the Celtic tradition was, making these friends and getting your family close so that they too can live this spiritual life of reflection and prayer and contemplation and lectio divina type of
Hmm.
study through scripture. Um, and help build them up so that they could take their monastery, kind of like what they would do in Ireland. You build up this monastery, you get all these people educated and get them really deep into their faith, and you would send them off somewhere else. So it just grows and grows and grows. Um, and so that is what we do with the Order of St. Patrick. So yeah, we're very devoted to our prayer life, very devoted to the spirituality. Um, and we are focused on, like I said, bringing this monastic lifestyle to just regular everyday people who are wanting to have this be a part of their life, but they're not called to go to a monastery in the most traditional way. So that's what the Order of St. Patrick is. One thing we focus is that though we have clergy who are involved, we want to lift up the lay person first over the clergy. So we take the idea of like the
Right.
last will be first, first will be last. And so yeah, it doesn't matter if you're a bishop, it doesn't matter if you're a priest or deacon. It's like, our laity are above us because we want to lift them up in that way. But it's not a power grab thing. The laity obviously are under the clergy because that's just how it naturally goes. So it balances itself out in that way. Um, let's see what else. There's so much. Yes, we have our own colors. We wear white albs, and it can be swapped out with cassocks as well with a green. Always blank on this word. As soon as I need it every single time. A green scapular. So not like the one you would see like with the Roman Catholic, where it has like the little picture in the rope. It's like the full you know cloth over. The best way I could say is if you've ever seen like a Dominican
Yeah.
monk with like a white alb, black covering over it. Like that's what that is. So green scapular. So that's our colors, white and green. Sometimes it can be swapped for black and green depending on the person. But the green is what we represent. Obviously for the Celtic tradition and just for the freshness of life there,
Hmm.
representing that nature aspect to it. Um, we value a lot of the Benedictine rules. So that's like primarily the Order of St. Patrick first was called the Order of St. Benedict. Um, but because there was a lot of Celtic tradition behind it, we moved towards St. Patrick. So we, obviously we are going through his writings, not as like a together thing, but obviously we point people for St. Patrick's writing and the other Celtic traditions there. Um, yeah, honestly, it's really that the spirituality that I value the most there because growing up it was like I love the idea of a monk, but it's like I just I don't have a monastery nearby where I can just like go to it. And so the fact that we're able to bring the monastery to the average person and say, hey, you
Right.
know, if you don't have that calling to be a minister, you can still participate in a deeper faith than what you may not be getting, in a regular Sunday service. And you get to be around brothers and sisters who are, one family here, constantly elevating each other up in this order. And the thing about it, if you're an Anglican and you're thinking, well, I want to join something like this, but I'm not part of the UECNA, the Order of St. Patrick has its independence enough where anybody in any Anglican tradition can join us. Right now, Jeremiah, LT Apologetics, he's ACNI, him and his wife, and they just both joined the order. So there are more recent converts there.
Hmm.
So yeah, Jay, if you ever want to join, you can as well. So yeah, and
Yeah, I know my wife and I have been talking about it. We just with health stuff and everything, it just right now. There he is, the Sith Master.
good.
Do it.
Good. Oh, if you're worried about health stuff, that's perfectly okay. We try to like we are very open and we goodness, my brain is shutting down now. We are very lenient. That's not the word I want to use, But it's like we understand the limitations of people who have health issues, and that's not a problem to the order at all. We try our best as well brothers now. So those are, like, we only technically have 3 confirmed brothers in the order, but obviously we have a lot of postulant people who are interested. But that was a question that was raised up, like, well, what about people with medical issues? It's like, we value them. Some of the best saints in history were the ones who just had severe ailments, but they remained faithful. And we want to help those who, have these medical conditions, who may feel like they get left behind, to lift them up and see if there can be a ministry of their own that they can do there. So yeah, if health is an issue where you think, I'm not medically cleared to do these things, like, we can make room for you.
All right. Okay. Yeah. I do like so I personally, one of the things we did during Lent, and it sticks in my head, because I had a very uh, charismatic experience during this time. But there is a Catholic monastery near about an hour or so from my house, and they have a relationship with our parish, which is crazy because it's named after Pope Leo. Was it the 10th that did that wrote was it Apostolica Curiae, where they said our holy orders are not valid, and everything. It's named after him. So it's the priest. My priest always jokes about how it's like we we have this monastery that's named after him that we're in very close relationship with. But we during Lent we had a time where we went there. We had 3 hours in silence and prayer and reflection, and you don't bother the monks as they're going about their day, but you walk around. You're free to walk around the grounds and pray. You just don't talk. You can read the Bible. You read the Bible, the Book of Common Prayer. If there's a theology book of something, but the whole point is to spend that time in quiet reflection and prayer about the Lord. And I would say at the end of that, it I mean, that was such a, I mean, or you think, man, sitting in silence, how is that, how is that, how's that refreshing? I mean,
Mhm.
some people can't help but to hear themselves talk. But I did feel, and I hate to use such a charismatic phrasing, but I did feel a closeness to the Lord that was strange. That again, coming from the charismatic background, closeness with the Lord is the Holy Spirit falls. You have a high time of praise and worship. Yes, you can have it in prayer, speaking in tongues and those kinds of things. But in that 3 hours, there was a closeness that I felt, and all I did was sit in silence and pray. And I read. I mean, I read a good portion of the 1662. I mean, I was reading and reading and just contemplating on the collects and that kind of stuff. And it was such a refreshing time. So I have a respect and a love for the monastic life, especially once you go and you look back at some of the um, deep things that a lot of the monastics have written and talked, and the charismatic experiences that they had. And actually, at the end of our confirmation classes, there's like 10 weeks, and then right before we're confirmed, the Saturday before, we're going to go back to St. Leo's, and we're going to be doing that again. And I'm really looking forward to that. So, like I said, I do have I have a new love for the monastic life or monastic orders in a way that I didn't have before. I just think that for a lot of people, when they think of monastic orders, they think of kind of, oh, those are those crazy guys who they go and they go to a monastery and they beat themselves and they do all this kind of crazy, this crazy stuff.
Only when the Vikings are on.
Right. And it's like, but it's not that. I mean, of course, in history there's some of that, and I think some of that just has to deal with just differences in doctrines and things between us and Rome. But if you if you if you experience monastic living in a way, in some kind of way, I think it will give you I think it would give you a respect for it that you may not have considered or had before. Um, so yeah, I definitely am considering that. Um, but the one thing I would say for me, I want to be careful there. I also just want to be careful that I don't commit to things and then don't follow through, because I don't like to commit to say I'm going to do something just to do it. If I want it to be, if I'm going to do that, I want it to be a part of. I really truly and honestly want to do it. So that's where the thinking and that kind of stuff is on that.
We'll have a conversation about this afterwards.
We indeed shall. Well, so we've been going a couple hours, and I know you're not feeling too good. But before we go, I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I absolutely will have to have you back on.
Oh, 100%.
Um, what would be uh, for people who are Pentecostal, charismatic, Church of Christ, evangelical, what have you? What would be your pitch, your argument for why they should consider Anglicanism as a potential home for them, as a potential tradition that they might want to seek out?
Yeah. Anglicanism, to me, if I was to borrow from the 99th Archbishop of Canterbury, almost kind of in a tongue-in-cheek way, he said it like this. Let me pull up the quote fully so I can get it. Geoffrey Fisher, the 99th Archbishop, said, "The Anglican tradition, in my belief, represents the Christian faith in a pure form that can be found in any other church in Christendom. If you want the most apostolic, the most open in a way where, the traditions of many can come together under one church in a respectable, sobering, and honest way without compromise when it's done correctly. A Protestant tradition that does not give up its Catholicity, a tradition rich with liturgy that doesn't get caught up in the goofiness of the smells and bells, and one that desires spirituality. It desires bringing the Bible to the laity, but also making it a liturgical book that it was always meant to be, and one that values prayer among all things, because that's what we're known as. We're the prayer book Catholics. The Anglican Church is for you. And in my opinion, along with Geoffrey Fisher, I have found no other tradition in Christendom that combines the best of all traditions while still uniquely having its own at the end of the day in a more complete via media and godly church that I have ever seen in my life. And do we have issues? Yeah. All groups have issues. I hate to break it to you. If you're trying to find a perfect church with no issues, you're not going to find it in Rome, the East, or Brother Bob's Bible Church. Every church has an issue. And the Anglican Church right now is in a rough state. However, the Universal Church fought the Arians, and we survived. The Anglican Church has been pushed against by the Catholics, by the Presbyterians, by the Latitudinarians, by all the issues one could think of, and yet we still remain. We have remained since the first century, and we remain today, and we will remain always until Christ returns. So that is my pitch to those who may be curious about the Anglican Church and wish to look into it more and potentially join us.
Yeah, I would agree, and there is a richness to the spirituality that I have not felt. I did I didn't think that I would find a spirituality like Pentecostalism until the first time I sat down and I recited the Book of Common Prayer. And as I read the words on the page, I felt the Holy Spirit just jump off the page to just speak in a charismatic sort of way. And it was, for me, it was the feeling of it was the same feeling of when you finally get home after a long, long trip, and I finally felt like I was home, and this lost, just troubled traveling oneness Pentecostal turned Trinitarian, trying to find my way after losing everything that I had ever known. I found a richness and a welcomeness in reciting the liturgy. And I would say that I would beckon anyone, if you're looking for, like you said, if you're looking for something historic, something Catholic, Protestant, with the richness of the spirituality that you think you won't have if you leave an evangelical or Pentecostal church, your home is in the Anglican tradition.
Amen.
So I think we can leave it there. Zach, thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for joining me at this stream. Like I said, we've been planning it for a long time, and brother, it's been great talking to you. I
There's
cannot
definitely a
wait
part
to.
2 in the mix.
Oh yeah, 100%. Um, and I'm so appreciative of this brother. He's we like I said, starting out I think we weren't sure about each other, but I can tell you this is one of my best friends, and I just really appreciate everything he's done, and just bit how what he's meant to me in my life. And brother, like I said, thanks for coming on, and we'll definitely be on again.
Hopefully, part 4 or part 5 is at the official live stream ordination of Father J.
Father Calvin. I'm gonna come on and say, yes, sir. Here I go. I'm gonna teach y'all the gospel now.
We had one Father Calvin. He didn't work out so well, but we got another one. He's gonna be good, baby.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It's been fun. Let's do it again.
All right, perfect.
Everyone, y'all take care now.
God bless.